That was my last summer camp. It was called Camp Catan, and it was on about 50 acres next to a school. I was 11 or 12 years old. Each year group had their own wooden cabin. There were lakes, swimming pools, hiking trails, and open areas for sports. We learned new things like how to boat and shoot an arrow while swimming and playing games during the day. They hired a bigger place farther south of Atlanta once or twice a year. For the bigger kids, this was where we would have sleepovers with campfires and fun things to do outside. I did it with my friends the year before and had a great time. We talked and laughed late into the night while sitting on the cold concrete slab next to a creek. From there, you could see 20 or 30 miles of old farms with lots of small trees and wild plants growing on it. The camp leaders, who were usually between the ages of 18 and 20, were pretty chill. They weren't too worried about following the rules. We were free to sleep in, and breakfast or roll call didn't happen until around noon. We played games, went on walks, and just hung out all day. After that, around 4 p.m., we would pack up and go back to the main camp. Not this time, though. My 3 friends and I planned to sneak out early just after dawn before the camp workers got up, so we could explore the farmlands that they didn't let us play in very often. We brought warm clothes and extra food with us. We quietly left as soon as we woke up. When we got to the end of the campground, we crossed the small creek that split it from the wild farmlands. There were broken gates and overgrown plants in the area we went into, which made it feel very old. There was old barbed wire fencing all the way across the hills. Trees had grown right through it and around the wire in some places. We chose to stay with the stream for as long as we could because we knew it would help us get back to the camp. The stream stopped running after about a mile, though, and the scenery changed completely. After the wild fir trees, there were neat rows of corn, and it looked like our path was gone. But as the sun came up and our joy pushed us forward, we kept walking up a small hill that showed up in front of us. As we got to the top of the hill, a man in overalls and a wide cap saw us. It was clear that he was a farmer. He looked shocked, but we were too far away for him to see us or ask what we were doing. So when he called out, we ran away quickly. After going another mile through the tall cornfields, the land changed again and it looked like the edges were clear. I saw what looked like a natural gate made of corn stalks curved into an arch. There was a small brook outside the arch that was bordered by big oak trees and looked as pretty as a picture in a book. We kept going because we were sure we were going straight and would be able to get back. Our clocks showed that it had only been an hour and a half. The land changed into a steep, rocky climb for the next mile or two after that quiet spot. There were lots of sharp thorns, trails that wound around, and no clear way to move forward. We talked about whether to turn around and got scratched by bushes on the way to a big valley. It was weird to see strange trees growing there, arranged in a way that didn't make sense, taking us down further. The tree's bark had flaked off and settled on the ground, showing a smooth, white, pasty surface. The tree's branches were long and thin. The blood-red leaves of the trees were the most interesting thing about them. The valley didn't have any green. It had a lot of moss, and the air smelled damp. We went deep into the valley by following the line of trees. As we went, we lost track of time. Near the very bottom of the valley, where there were only trees, we found a Victorian-style house with 3 stories. But just as we saw the house, it started to rain hard, making the valley very muddy. Even from far away, the house looked old and worn. Years of rain and rot had made it sag. It was made of wood all the way through, with only a few single-pane glass windows that were still whole. Part of the house that wasn't made of wood was the part that held up the stairs that led inside. The door was wide open. We felt stupid for going inside, but wet fools like places that might be dry. As soon as we found our way, we planned to go back to camp without letting anyone know. I was the first person in the house because I was in charge of our group. When I put my foot on the first step, it felt hollow and weak, but it could still support my weight. The front door was about 8 feet long and 6 feet wide, and behind us was a long stairwell that went up to the 2nd and 3rd floors. We could see clear holes in the 2nd floor that led to dark places. The big windows in front of the house lit up the stairs, though. The sound of water was loud and clear, but the area around the open doorway was dry. The rest of the house was dark and smelled like mold and dampness. We stopped for a moment to rest while I put my pack down and got my compass. While I was looking at our snacks, I heard a moan that sounded like wind and rain coming from somewhere on top of the house, if it still had one. Then I heard the most thunderous footsteps I've ever heard going down the stairs. As soon as my friends heard the sound, they ran. I thought about it for a moment. You could see about 2/3 of the way up the stairs, but there was nothing there. I slammed the door behind me as I jumped out and grabbed my bag. When I touched the wet wood, it felt like wet paper instead of old wood. When I took the last step, it broke under me and pieces flew all over the place. It rained as I ran up the hill after my friends. There was a loud sound behind me as I ran. The door was being kicked open. It shook the whole valley. I barely remember the trip back, but I do remember that we got to camp around 2 p.m. and ate a late, shaky breakfast or lunch. For 22 years, I didn't think ghosts existed. The truth is that I still believe there is a reasonable reason for hauntings. It could not be a ghost, though there is a strange force making things happen. Anyway, Owen, my roommate, and I got some money and moved to Colorado. We rented a small house out in the middle of nowhere. The neighbors next door only used their cabins in the summer, so it seemed like we were the only ones there most of the year. One of the best things about living in the woods is that it is very quiet and peaceful, which is hard to find elsewhere. The only sound in your home when everything is turned off is the wind blowing through the trees. There is no noise from cars, trucks, or people. It's just nature and you. After the first week or two in the cabin, Owen and I started to notice strange things going on. At first, it was very quiet. It was hard to explain, but something didn't seem right. Owen joked that he didn't like being alone in the cabin because he thought it was creepy. There was a room in the back, and if you stood there at night, you felt like someone was watching you, even though you knew no one was there. When I got home from work, I would sometimes feel very scared and uneasy. I thought I was crazy, and maybe making things up because I wasn't used to being alone and quiet in the winter. But then, I saw that things were moving around. I looked everywhere one morning but couldn't find my car keys. I finally found them in a strange place, like on top of the fridge. Owen kept telling me it wasn't him, so I thought he was playing a joke on me. Soon I moved his stuff too, and he got very angry because he thought I was playing a joke on him. The next night we played video games while we hung out, when all of a sudden something flew in front of us. We looked at each other for a moment before we realized we had both seen it. The cabin was built in an A-frame style, which meant it was mostly one big room with a loft above and a space downstairs. The kitchen and our beds were on one side, and the living room, which had a TV and a nice gas stove, was on the other side. The small thing that flew across the room went from the kitchen to the front door. We had a good look at it, and it moved so quickly that it looked like it was thrown. It turned out to be just one green bean from that night's dinner. We looked at it while holding it up. It had flown from the stove in the back to the front door, across the whole cabin. A little bean couldn't move that way by itself, it seemed. I knew our home was haunted when I woke up the next morning and thought about what had happened. Things went crazy over the next few months. Things like box cutters, car keys, and whole decks of cards would fly around our apartment right in front of us. Sounds that seemed to come from right in the middle of the house would growl at night. On the other hand, sounds can travel in strange ways in the mountains, so we might have only heard animals close. My roommate once came out of the shower in a big, angry rage. "Why would you leave the lights off while I'm in the shower?" he yelled, water falling out of his hair. He asked what I knew, and I told him I didn't know. The most annoying thing, though, was that our stuff kept getting lost. That's why we chose to test it one night. We put our car keys in a certain spot in the kitchen so that we would remember where they were. We checked early in the morning to see if they were still there. As always, the keys were gone when we woke up. That wasn't the only thing. They were hidden on our small shelves between the pages of a colored mockingbird. It took us hours to find them. I couldn't find my phone at all the next morning. We called it, and it rang loudly through the whole house. The sound was coming from somewhere, but we couldn't place it. Our last stop was the bathroom, where the noise seemed to be coming from behind a wall. It was hanging there, so I told myself to forget about it. Given how strange things are, it's likely in the wall. There could be a hole or something. As soon as I moved the vanity off of its nail, my phone fell out of the back and hit the floor. Owen lost all color in his face when we looked at each other. How is that even possible? How did that get done? Then on the weekend, a friend came to visit. When she opened the door, my car keys flew across the room and almost hit her in the face. She asked, "Wait, is the cabin haunted?" We laughed. Yes, things do get thrown around sometimes, but you have to forget about it. After everything we went through, it was easy to see why she didn't want to stay there anymore. Because of this, I asked my landlady to tell me some background about the cabin we were renting. She got very defensive when I brought it up. She crossed her arms and said she had owned it for years and nothing strange had ever happened to it. However, I knew she wasn't telling the truth, so I asked her to explain. To cut a long story short, we were kicked out of our apartment a few months later. I'm still not sure how to explain all the strange things that happened, but after that, yes, I do believe in ghosts and other things we can't explain. As a kid, I loved summer because my sister and I went to my grandparents' house in Minnesota for a month every summer. Because I'm the oldest of 3 boys, my dad would take us and our cousins Ryan, Alexandra, and Tyler there. The house was by a lovely lake with lots of tall trees all around it. We spent the days swimming, fishing, and hiking in the woods. From when I was 7 to 17 years old, those times at the cabin were my best. After that, my grandma got sick and died. My grandpa didn't come to the cabin as often, and we were all getting older. During high school, my sister and Ryan went to college, and the rest of us were busy with friends and classes. As the years went by, my grandfather also died. My dad and his brothers were given the cabin and had to make a tough choice. They chose to sell it and split the money. However, my dad asked if any of us grandchildren would like to go to the camp one last time. Tyler, his girlfriend, my sister, and I were the only ones who could go. We were shocked that the place didn't smell musty, as places do after being empty for 5 years. When we opened the door, it smelled like wood and lake air instead. The memories came back to us as soon as we walked in. As we looked around, we took a moment to remember all the places we had been as kids. My sister said there was a sitter who must have let the place air out. While making dinner that night, we saw a small bag of food in the fridge. We thought the housekeeper had left it, so we went on with our evening. I heard what sounded like someone moving around in the kitchen late that night while I was in bed. I thought it was someone else getting something to eat or drink. The next morning, my sister asked us which of us was making noise. I agreed and told her I was also woken up, but Tyler and his girlfriend said it wasn't them. We were in the bedrooms below and they were in the loft. We were scared for a moment as we tried to figure out who was in the house. There was nothing broken in the doors and windows that we checked. That afternoon, everyone but my sister wanted to go to the lake. She had a headache, though. We were having fun in the sun and swimming when, all of a sudden, we heard screams and saw my sister running toward us. She came up to us, out of breath and looking scared. We knew there was someone in the house by her gasp. Tyler and I looked at each other with worry, then automatically ran toward the cabin. With both of us being in the military, it was easy for us to act quickly in this case. We were scared and determined as we walked up, ready to protect our family. We weren't sure if the intruder was still inside since the door was wide open. We looked around with a fire stick and found that he was long gone. We called the cops, and when they got there, we found out that he was probably homeless and had been living in the cabin because it had been mostly empty for 6 years. In the dirty basement, we found a sleeping bag rolled up, some tuna cans, and a lantern. My sister told us she thought it was one of us making strange noises in the kitchen. She was shocked to see a man with long, wild hair and a beard when she walked in. He seemed just as shocked to see her. After a few months, the cabin was sold, and my uncle said they never had any more trouble with that guy. I loved going to see my grandparents in the Ozarks, where they lived in a small house in the woods. It was great to be in a place with trees after being in West Texas. They fixed up the house to look like a log home after about a year or two. After making the changes, they added beautiful wooden features to the house. The 2 decks with mountain views were beautiful, and they turned the basement into a whole new living space. I was excited to stay there in the summer because it looked so great, but when I got there, the mood was a little off. Even though my grandparents were very nice, it felt angry. I was shown around, and most of the inside was the same as before. I was scared when we went to the basement, though. I didn't want to go down there by myself, and I couldn't stay for long. I never felt safe in the basement, so I always chose to sleep upstairs. One time I was going down the stairs to get some laundry that was in a small room across from the basement. I was only 3 steps down when all of a sudden I felt a terrible cold wash over me. I was frozen. Then out of the blue I felt a strong force push against my back. The stairs started to slide away from me before I knew what was going on. I was so scared I couldn't even scream as I fell. It seemed like time stopped. If I could move again, I quickly got dressed and ran back up the stairs. I didn't go back down for days. After about a week, it was July 3rd. Even though it had rained all day, it was still warm outside. My grandparents went to a party across the street, so I stayed home by myself to keep an eye on things. The last bit of daylight was going out, and it was still raining outside. The sky was getting darker. I put on headphones and sat in the loft to listen to music. A steady rain hit the windows and the wind howled outside. Then, all of a sudden, I felt a cold breeze I knew. This time, though, things were different. The back of my neck was the only part of my body that felt cold. It wasn't as cold as the long, bitter cold I had felt before. It was quick and easy. It felt like someone was blowing softly on my neck. I was so scared I couldn't even breathe. The headphones I had on flew off my head so hard that they hit the TV screen while I stood still. When I turned on the TV, all I heard was loud, buzzing static. It wouldn't turn off no matter what I did. To calm down, I looked at a picture of a meadow that my grandparents had put up next to the TV. I saw it after that. I had never seen a man with such a scary, evil face before I saw him in the picture. His eyes were white and empty. Even though I looked into them, I still felt quite scared. I was so scared that I ran out into the rain without shoes on. I went to my grandparents' house but didn't tell them what had happened. When I got back home the next morning, I made up a lame reason for leaving. They were scary though, so I never went back to the house. Some of you may be asking why I didn't tell anyone. Well, I was only 12 or 13 years old at the time. That's why I doubt anyone would have believed me even if I had.